This is sort of my first thing. Y'all, and Paul, correct me if not, I'm not exactly aware of all the particular readings that y'all have this semester. But if they read the stuff on confirmation bias. The reason why this is important, this is sort of a sociological term, as y'all read in your readings. Somebody who read the readings, tell me really quick, in the 10 seconds, what confirmation bias is. Yes, ma'am.
You look for information that confirms your beliefs, so you ignore what is contradictory to what you believe, and you give more credence to the things that are in line with what you believe. And exactly, perfect. And if somebody else, why does that? What does that do when a natural human tendency is to do that? All of us do that. I do that. It's much more comfortable for me to read things that confirm what I already agree with and ignore stuff that disagrees. It's natural. I want to be around people that agree with you, whatever happens to be. Why is that? Why does that become problematic in any sort of field, business, politics, whatever it happens to be, that natural human tendency to do that? Why is that a problem? Somebody else other than, what was your name? Margo.
Somebody else other than Marco.
Because ultimately you're not necessarily choosing the right answer, you're choosing what you want to believe, and there may be loads of evidence to the contrary that you're just ignoring.
Yeah, exactly. And when people, yes, sir?
I was just saying you're less able to communicate with somebody who believes differently.
Exactly. And what happens when you, over time, that you have an opinion about something and then only do stuff that reinforces, what happens to your opinion? What is your opinion come? If you have an opinion, I believe X, and you look at 10 pieces of information, confirmation bias-wise, that agree with you, what does your opinion become? It becomes more extreme, becomes a fact. And so when what you view as a fact, you can't have a discussion with somebody. There's no longer an opinion. If I have an opinion and you have an opinion, we can have a discussion. But if I think what I believe is a fact and what you believe is you're way off and you're Looney Tunes, we can't have a discussion. And the reason why I think it's important to understand in anything, this is why, if you want an explanation about many things that happen in life, why did New Coke get introduced? Confirmation was hugely involved in that. They went out and gathered research and confirmed what they wanted to believe, launched a product, and it wasn't accepted. It was all based on confirmation bias. The Challenger disaster, NASA went back and looked at it and basically said confirmation was designed in that the decisions that led up to that, because people wanted to launch and then they looked for information that confirmed it. What other major event in the last 5 years could you say could be attributed to confirmation bias?
Iraq War.
The Iraq War. Yeah, which is if you go back and look at the reports and all those sorts of things, which is you take something, the launch of New Coke, you take, somebody picking a boyfriend or a girlfriend, seems all minor, confirmation bias, you look for the good things, ignore the bad things. Well, we'll have a war, the largest war in the, obviously in the last 50 years, to a large degree, much of it was based, not finding direct fault or whatever, was based in confirmation bias. Information was looked for to confirm decisions that somebody wanted to make at low levels and at high levels, I believe. Political campaign or understanding a political campaign, understand this human quality, and it's involved externally. the coverage, as Wayne will say later in the semester about this, the coverage of a particular campaign involves confirmation by the coverers and the coverees. And understanding that allows you to be more successful in your campaign. Understanding that a particular media outlet or a particular media person may walk in with a bias, a confirmation bias, and I'm not saying the media is liberal, therefore they want to attack Republicans or conservative candidates, or Fox News is too conservative and they're going to attack liberal candidates, or whatever the thing happens to be. It could be as basic of somebody's decided that the storyline in their mind about a particular candidate is X, and then they cover the campaign looking for confirmation of that storyline they've decided. A perfect example of that, which is about to present itself, and it may be factual, I think it's probably factual, Fred Thompson is lazy. Right? If you've read the newspaper and you've heard anything, Fred Thompson is the laziest guy on the planet. What do you think is going to happen the first times he goes to Iowa and New Hampshire and he's on a trip? What do you think is going to go on? What will the media do?
It's already happened.
Well, it's already happened, but what will they continue to do? They'll stake out his hotel. Was Fred Thompson up at 7 a.m.? Or did he sleep in till 9 a.m. or 10 a.m.? Did he go to bed early? Is he working hard? How's it to staff? Now, I think if anybody people know, which I have known a lot of people that have worked for him, I wouldn't call him lazy. I would say relaxed. Which is probably, he probably wants to say at peace. So that's a perfect example. Hillary Clinton. Every one of these sort of people in these candidates' governor's races, Rick Perry, George Bush, whatever the thing is, everybody covers and looks at them. So externally and internally in the course of a campaign, it's important to be aware of this bias. It's important to be aware of it in life generally. I would recommend, if you're somebody that's a progressive candidate, I know this is going to feel like fingernails on the chalkboard, but maybe listening to talk radio sometimes to get a sense of what other people are thinking. And if you're a conservative candidate, a person, this again like fingers on a chalkboard, listen to NPR. Might not be a bad idea sometimes to listen to and gather information. If you like Fox News, you might want to watch something else every now and then. If you read the Wall Street Journal, you might want to read the New York Times. If you do whatever you're looking at, or whatever your perspective is, I think it's a good idea to expose yourself to things that sort of make you feel a little bit uncomfortable in your own beliefs. Because the result of that will be two things. The result of that is you might actually learn something, and you might actually question what you believed and say, maybe I was wrong to believe this, maybe I should change my mind on something. And two is maybe you'll understand in a conversation or a communication or a political campaign how somebody on the opposite side of you, what information they're getting, what they think, how they gather it, what's all that. So one, it should maybe help you grow in your own sort of sense of education, but two is it actually might be whatever job you're doing, it might do your job better. And this is a fancy clicker, but we'll go to this. I think that's right. Thank you. I tell everybody political campaign, if you think about a political campaign, it's like a multi-chaptered book. And when you write your campaign plans and you put your stuff together, I think it's important that you sort of say it like that. Every part of a campaign isn't its own silo. It's not. We got our TV spots here, and we have our free press strategy here, and we're going to do this at conventions, and we have these celebrities, and we have a speech. They're not silos. They need to be a long part of a narrative, a long narrative. Each is a chapter in that narrative. And what happens in many campaigns is they go A, B, ask the candidate to vote, ask somebody to vote for the candidate, and skip over C, D, E, F, H, and G, Y, all the way to the end, and they say, our candidate's going to say this, we're going to say this in our TV spots, we're going to say this, but all differently. And what voters want a sense of is that long narrative. And you can't ask a voter, you can't get a voter to do something before they're ready. Before they're ready, before they gather the information, before they've seen all the context of it, they want to understand what your candidate is and who they stand for through various methods that you have to talk about those things. that you'll learn in the course of the semester. They also want to understand where the opponent is and where that fits in the context. All of those sorts of things are all chapters in a long story that gets to Election Day and that says vote for X or vote against Y. And that really is, and you think about the campaign and think about the context of this, all of those parts have to fit together. And many times, as I said, people silo those things. They got the paid media consultants, they got all these people, they got the speechwriter, and they all sort of sit in the room, they all do sorts of their sort of work, and it doesn't feel and doesn't look like a natural sort of narrative storyline in the course of that. Historic and demographics. If you're understanding this, and Paul, they're going to be doing what kind of campaigns in the...
Mostly state rep and statewide, like the Senate race.
Okay. So in that context, the history of that district, the history of that state, the dynamics politically of that jurisdiction, the demographics that exist in there, what percentage Latino it is, what percentage woman it is, how old is the district, how young, how Republican is the district, how Democratic is the district, how independent is the district. All of those sorts of factors determine about 95% of what's going to happen on Election Day. Factors that basically, to a large degree, are outside of your control. That's just the nature of the state, the nature of the district, the nature of the dynamics that are involved at the time, at the current time, are determined before you even write your campaign plan. So you have to understand what those are in order to impact the 5 or 6% that you can actually impact in the course of a political campaign through communication, discussion, even changing a slight turnout. It was only going to impact probably 5 or 6% of what's going to happen in that race. So one of the first things I always do in anything that I've looked at is understand the historic voting patterns, the demographics of that, what's going on in the district, what's happening in there, what's happened in there, what does the trend line look like from the last election to this election, no understanding it's only going to be slight changes unless redistricting had happened in between, and that won't have happened in this campaign, in this course. And so understanding that is an important first step in doing that. And that data, because of the internet, is readily available. It wasn't like it used to be 10 or 12 years ago where you had to go find it and get hard copies and all that. Usually that's right on the internet. It's all there. You can find State Rep District 138 and get a ton of information, sensitive information, historic political information, all that sorts of stuff. And even there might even be polling information released in previous times and in news agencies or whatever it happens to be, probably not for state rep districts, but probably for statewide. Different types of campaigns. You all are going to be involved in partisan campaigns, which is different than a issue campaign, like you vote on an initiative or referendum. And the reason why I bring this up, though it's not particular in what you're going to be on this, you may be involved when you leave school, when you go do something else. A lot of different campaigns. Something could be a partisan primary campaign. Something could be a nonpartisan judicial election. Something could be an issue campaign. Something could be a corporate campaign. All campaigns utilize the same tools to accomplish their ends. Whether it's somebody trying to introduce a product into the marketplace, whether it's somebody trying to record a music group, trying to put a campaign out for their latest album, whether it's somebody that's got a campaign on changing the Constitution in a given state, presidential primaries, all of them are different campaigns, but all use the same tools, but your job is to understand the weight of which you apply to those tools. Some campaign it's more important to have paid media, as you'll learn in the course of this. Some campaigns it's more important to have free media, dealing with Wayne Slater and the other media people of the world. Some campaigns, it's more important to have grassroots and door knocking. All the campaigns, while utilizing all those tools, put different emphasis on different parts of it based on the particular campaign you're in, but also based upon your candidate. Your candidate may be better on sort of on the stump door knocking than they are on television. And you have to understand that. Though if your candidate in this day and age is really, really bad on television, they're probably going to have some difficulty, maybe not in a state rep race, but in a statewide race, how you come across on television and how you convey yourself in the course of that has become obviously very, very important.
Not necessarily through paid commercials. You can make anybody look good, as Paul knows, in a paid commercial. You can mostly make anybody look good. In a paid commercial, it's the free media and how you come across at a press conference, in a debate, whatever that happens to be. This is just a quick thing that I put together, and you can see it's a circle. It says audience, insight, message, delivery. And this is a way to understand really the elements of a campaign and how they fit together. And what this is audience is who is it that you're going to appeal to in this course of this campaign to get 50% plus one in your race? Who's the audience? And you're going to understand the analysis. You may find out that 45% of the district is going to vote for you no matter what. You're a Democrat running in a district that's more Democratic, and now you need to get 5 or 6%. Who is that 5 or 6% you're going to get? And that 5 or 6% could be motivating more Democrats, persuading independents, persuading Republicans, depending on where you come from. So understanding that audience is always a first key step in that. Using historic, using demographics, using polling, using all that research, you got to understand the audience that it's going to get you to 50% plus one. The next thing is insight. Insight is basically the research it's going to do to figure out who that audience is and what appeals to that audience and ways to talk to that audience that'll either motivate or persuade them. That's insight. And that can be in various ways. You'll have a whole class on polling and focus groups and all of those sorts of things. You need insight in them to talk about not only figure out who they particularly are, but also what issues matter, the ways to talk about the issues, all those sorts of things. Messages, you design a message that appeals to that. And again, as I said, a message can either motivate, a message can persuade, or a message can do, if you're lucky, you can figure out a message that both motivates and persuades. And so developing a message from that research, and again, you'll have an entire class on message, which is very important. To me, that I've always tell people that there are two parts to a campaign, message and mechanics. And you can win a campaign that has a good message and bad mechanics. You can win. The best campaign is good message, good mechanics. You usually can't ever win a campaign that has good mechanics and bad message. And you could see that in the course if you watch campaigns and do all that. Like somebody's got great, I don't understand, we lost. We had this great stuff, we had phone banks, we had all these people and all that, and they never had a message that appealed to people, that struck people where they, in their hopes and their dreams. And then the last part of the circle is delivery. And delivery is, we know the audience, we got the research that says this, we know what the message is, how do people get communications in the different ways, and how are we going to deliver it to them? Is it direct mail? Is it a paid TV spot? Is it a press conference? Is it a speech? Is it door knocking? Whatever it is it over the internet? Whatever it happens to be, you got to figure out the ways that you want to deliver that message in the course of the campaign. And the likelihood you're going to deliver it in various different vehicles. How much allocation you do to that, how much you put on paid and all that is something in this course that you'll learn. Different campaigns do it in different ways. There's no exact science to it. Some campaigns you may spend 70% on paid media, some you may spend 30%, depends on the campaign and the context. But the reason why this is a circle like this, and it's a repeating circle, is that ultimately you then have to say, did we deliver it in the course of the campaign? Did we deliver the message to the right audience? Has the audience adjusted because of our change in what the other opponent said and what I've seen? Do we need to do more insight, more research? Do we need to slightly alter our message? Then do we need to deliver it? So it's a constant rotating circle. You don't just say audience, research, message, delivery, we're done, because it's going to be a constantly changing thing. The campaigns are dynamic. They say something, you say something, audiences respond to it, you learn along the way, you learn a better way to do it, you learn they figured out a better way to do it, you have to respond to it. So it's a constantly changing that you have to be aware of in the course of the campaign and be able to make adjustments along the way. Not like many campaigns, throw out their entire message and start all over. If you've done the research and done this stuff right at the beginning, you have a basic good message, but you may have to make slight alterations into how you say it and the different ways you say it. Targeting is just another way. It's one of the things that you do at the beginning of the campaigns, and targeting is looking at the historic, looking at the demographic, looking at the polling, and basically says, how are we going to win this race? Do we need 62% of people 18 to 25? Do we need 58% of women voters in this? Do we need
22% of African American voters? Do we need 45% of Latino voters? Targeting basically provides you the avenue that says, how do I get to 50%? How do I get to 50% plus one? And before you write your campaign plan, you have to understand, how do you get that coalition that gets to 50% plus one? You can't just like, we're going to have this great message, we're going to say all this kind of stuff. You have to say, okay, I have an expectation, we're going to get X, Y, and Z, and then how do I get a campaign plan that gets me to 50%? I've seen campaign plans that people wrote that said they were going to get X, Y, and Z, and when I added it all up, it added up to 48% of the vote. And I said, well, I was like, well, that's what we thought we could get. I said, okay, you're going to lose. So design your campaign and all that based upon the fact that you're going to get 50%. Hopefully more. I think actually you ought to design it in a way that sort of obviously gives you margin for error. But targeting is the way that basically puts the coalition together on paper that says, how are you going to win from the different groups of voters in that jurisdiction, state or precinct. Persuasion versus motivation. This is a major decision that every political campaign has to make. Every political campaign has to decide, are we a campaign that is more about persuasion? And persuading means, are we persuading people that are undecided or lean against us or lean for us to vote for us? Or is it about motivation? We're in a time where we're not going to be really able to persuade people, but we just need to motivate more of our supporters to come out. And if we motivate enough supporters of ours that we know are out there, we don't have to convince them they're undecided, then we'll win this election. And each campaign is different. Some campaigns, that allocation is 50-50. Some campaigns, I'll give you a perfect example, in 2000, about 70% of the campaign in 2000, the president's campaign in 2000, was targeted at persuasion. In 2004, about 70% was targeted at motivation. Very different campaigns. Millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars were spent and allocated based on that decision. What TV shows that were bought, how direct mail was sent, the phone calls that were used, the type of speeches that the candidate gives, all of that comes from a decision. Are we a campaign? That's probably mine. Sorry about that. I didn't put it on sonar to like a.
Sounds like something from the hunt from Red Off.
Yeah, Fred Thompson's calling. Yeah, it's 10:30. Terrific timing. It's his first morning phone calls. See, I bought totally into it too. That is funny how that happens. The same thing is true of like Bush. Bush was his. And there's obviously always a kernel of truth based in all of those preconceptions. You know, is Bush stupid or is Bush dumb or whatever? And then what happened when he was got asked that pop quiz on the, whatever, general? Who's the head of Pakistan? General. I don't know if you all remember that. It was quite amazing. Who's the Speaker of the Parliament in England? Speaker. He didn't say that, but I'm just joking. Well, it's funny, general. So persuasion versus motivation is a key decision. And much of that is driven by the context of the political time, where the country is, where the state is, one. Two, the type of candidate. Even if we had wanted to, in 2004, to run a persuasion campaign, we didn't have the candidate to be able to do that because of the perception of George W. Bush in 2004 going into election day or a year out there was 45 or 46% of the country that basically said, he's an idiot, I don't like the way he walks, he's screwed up the country, it doesn't matter what. And there was basically 46 or 47% of the country that basically said, he's done a great job. I love the way he walks. He's done a wonderful thing. I like him. I like Laura. That's it. And that basically was the reality. And which is why I always told everybody this election was going to be a 51, 52% election, no matter not. It was just the reality of the candidate and the time that we're in, the polarization that existed. Now we could have a long discussion about the chicken and the egg on that. What caused the polarization? Did the candidate cause the polarization, or did the candidate reflect the polarization of the country? That's a discussion that you could have.
I think it's probably a little bit of both, but sort of it's the context of the time and who your candidates are, who your opponent's candidates are, is how much money, how much time you should spend on allocation, which I'll talk about in a sec, versus persuasion versus motivation. A big decision in a campaign, as I've talked throughout this, is how do you allocate resources? How much money should we spend on research? How much money should we spend on field? How much money should we spend on television or radio commercials? How much money should we spend talking to the press? How much money in the course of the campaign should we allocate in the different ways, direct mail, phones, all the different ways to talk should we do? And just because you ran and won one campaign, as I said, and did it all one way and allocated it one way, doesn't mean you should do that the same thing again. And many people say, they go from a winning campaign, they say, we want it this way, we're going to do it this way. Block walking worked great in this campaign, we're going to go over here and do it again, and then they lose and they don't understand why. Well, because the context for the election, the candidates, what was available, all that changes from campaign to campaign. And so how do you allocate resources? It should be a blank slate in your mind, basically. And then you sort of look at, what do we need to spend to do the sort of circle, the audience and insight and message and delivery? What do we need to get to that point where we can win? And then divide your resources. And there's no right answer to this question. So when you write your campaign plans, just because one group said they were going to spend 70% on something, and the next group said they were going to spend 65% or 60% or whatever, 50% on something, doesn't mean one's right and one's wrong. It should flow from the targeting, the strategy, and all that. And as you'll write these, and the ones that do well, basically have a plan that sort of folds all together, that sort of says they understood the strategy, they understood the district, they understood the state, they wrote a plan, they allocated resources, they decided what they were going to do, they came up with their messaging, and all of it feels like they thought all of it through. And great campaigns have lost. Great campaigns have lost. And some bad campaigns have won. Most of the time, great campaigns win, and most of the time, bad campaigns lose. But you could write a campaign, run a campaign, and be involved in a campaign that the dynamics were just such that the outside external forces overwhelmed it, and it doesn't matter how good your campaign was, you couldn't compete with that. And that happens all the time. I did, this is not to say that we didn't run a good campaign. I did a race in the Bahamas earlier this year, part of my personal journey, and for Prime Minister. And we ended up winning. First time an incumbent prime minister lost. We beat the incumbent prime minister. But I'll tell you a little thing about external circumstances. When in the course of the race, when we started looking at it and polling and doing all this stuff, we were behind. And then guess what happened? We were behind. We thought it'd be an uphill battle. We thought he'd have a chance. Really good guy. Thought he'd have a chance. There was a lot of issues in the country that needed to be addressed. But we were behind. Thought it'd be an uphill struggle. Well, Anna Nicole Smith dies at the beginning of the campaign. And after her death, various stories surface in the Bahamas, not the least of which was pictures of her in bed with the interior minister of the incumbent prime minister because of her residency requirements and all those sorts of things. So for 2 weeks, it was Anna Nicole Smith in the Bahamas, all of that sort of stuff, all that came of stuff. After that was over, we were even. Did we have any idea? Do we have any idea Anna Nicole Smith? Do we have any idea any of that? Do we have any of that? No. Was it our genius or whatever, or all of that sort of stuff? No. We were smart enough to know, actually before that, when we came up with our messaging, we came up with this sort of thing, a matter of trust. And because we knew there was this sense in the administration and all the other stuff, that stuff was going on, it just so happened Anna Nicole Smith thing broke, and that it was basically became trust of the current government. But that's an example. But who would have known that? Who would have any idea anything like that could happen? Who would know that somebody would make a huge faux pas? And of course, who would know that some third-party candidate would run in the middle of a race, get up and run in the middle of a race, governor's race last year, where you had 2 independent candidates. If you were planning that race without that knowledge, and that's sort of said Rick Perry versus the Democrat, what would you do? And then all of a sudden he ends up with 2 independent candidates, not the least of which was an author, a sort of wild author, Kinky Friedman, that both of those changed the context of that campaign. And some of those things you just don't know. You adapt along the way as you learn, and obviously that's smart. But as I say,
there's not a wrong way to do this. The wrong way is not having an allocation of resources and your plan reflect your overall strategy, your message. The wrong way is somebody picks up your thing and it doesn't look like it goes together. It doesn't, they're like, well, you say your candidate's really photogenic and you say you need to do this, but you're putting all your money into field. I don't understand how those two things fit together. So allocation of resources that's reflected from your strategy. Message, you'll learn more about this, but really quickly, to me, the best message is like a coin. And the best message is a coin which says, we think this race is going to be about X. Our candidate is on one side of the coin who stands for X, who represents X. On the opposite side of the coin is the opponent who represents the anti-X, the opposite of that message. And so voters, every time they hear from you, get a reinforcement on one side, and every time they hear about your opponent, they get a reinforcement on the negative side. That really is the best possible messaging. Perfect example, 2004. What was the messaging about Bush? If you can remember that. What was our broad, big messaging about Bush?
He's stable.
Stay strong and decisive leader. You disagree with him on issues. You know where he stands. You know he'll be there. Strong and decisive, time of great anxiety. Okay, that's Bush on one side of the coin. What was Kerry on the opposite side of the coin? Opposite side is strong and decisive leader. You know where he stands, even if you disagree with him. And the Kerry campaign, I don't exactly know what their message about themselves were, and I don't know what their fundamental message about us was. It wasn't for sure opposite sides of a coin. But you know, the '92 Clinton race, another great example. Clinton was, I care about you, I feel your pain. Opposite side of the coin is somebody that doesn't know what a scanner is at a grocery store or looks at his watch in the course of a debate. Doesn't understand what's going on in America, doesn't seem to care about you. Opposite sides of the same coin. When you write a message and you put this together, that's really important to try to keep in mind. You can't say one thing about yourself and then something totally different about your opponent and tell them this is what the election is about. Because they'll be like, wait a sec, I thought the election was about this, but you're telling me this. You have to help define the election for the people. This is what it's about. Leadership is about this. We need this kind of leader here. Our guy or gal is this kind of leader. The other person is the opposite of that because of all these attributes. And that's fundamentally what your message and broad messaging has to be. It's got to be the opposite side of the same coin, the same broad message. Values. This is very important, especially in statewide races. Less important, though important, than as you go down the ballot. But you have to figure out what value this campaign or this candidate or the Times represents. And by value, I mean things like strong and decisive leader, like compassion, like tolerance, like all the different sort of big values, like honesty, ethics, or whatever those big, broad values are. And then you have to figure out a way to talk about the issues in the context of that value. And so most campaigns, hardly any campaigns in this country are issue campaigns. Voters don't vote based on issues. Voters vote based on values. They use issues as indicators, just like they use the personality of a candidate as an indicator for a value. How somebody is, or how they come across on television, isn't just I like that person's personality. Does that person seem more like me? Does he share my values? Does he come across as tolerant, compassionate? Whatever those things are, those personality traits are reinforcements, are indicators for a broader value, just like issues are. Just like issues are. So if you talk about education, or you talk about gay marriage, or you talk about abortion, or you talk about any issue, they should be talked about in a broader context of a value. Not that we should do this based on, here's these 5 bullet points, these policy specifics, and this is what we should do. They should all be a context of a broader context of a broader value. Which goes to this part is fundamentally your message and your communication should be aimed at people's hearts and their guts, not their heads. Because in the end, that's how people fundamentally decide. You have to give them information after you connected at their heart or their gut level for their head, so they can say, basically, okay, my gut and heart believes this. Give me some information so that I might, intellectually, I got all the gathered the evidence and all of that sort of thing. But you've got to strike people in their heart or in their gut, which is why values are so important, because that's where they are. They're in the gut. Issues are all in the head. Values are all in the gut, and values are all in the heart. And that's really the best campaigns. It's one of the reasons why John Kerry, while very smart, very that, always sort of seemed to be connecting at somebody's head level and not at a gut or a heart level. And same is true of Al Gore. I mean, same is true of which is why I think the Democrats this cycle, I think, need to be searching for who that candidate is that can connect at that heart or the gut level, not at the head level. And you watch the candidates do that. And I think you watch, as I watched Hillary, I watched her, who sort of her natural sweet spot was probably the intellectual level. But I think she understands that she has to connect at a gut and a heart level with the public if she's going to succeed. I think Barack Obama gets that. I think some of the Republicans get that better than other Republicans could get that. But fundamentally, it's got to be a heart-gut connection and not a head connection. Love versus hate. Winning campaigns, and this is are always the ones that win. Usually, always have a majority of their voters that go there because they like you, they support you, they want you. There's hardly any campaigns that win in this country that are a majority of people voting against somebody. Is it important information to have? Yeah, but on election day, and I'm just saying this from an allocation of resources standpoint, from your campaigns. If most winning campaigns in this country are based upon support of your candidate as opposed to opposition to the other, that should determine how you communicate and how you allocate resources in the course of a campaign. And the sort of things, the idea that I'm going to go 100% negative and we're going to do all this and this we're going to do, you might win, but their chance is lower if you don't have if your coalition on election day doesn't have a majority of people that went there primarily for the reason because they supported you. When you looked on Election Day in 2004, a vast majority of people that went to vote for George Bush voted for him because they wanted him. And a smaller percentage voted him because they didn't want Kerry. If you looked at Kerry's coalition, the majority of people that voted for John Kerry because they didn't want George Bush, not because they liked John Kerry. And I think, actually, if you sort of look at and take an analysis of their campaign, I think that was a big failure of their campaign, which never gave people the pro or the why. It was always why not. And I think that was a big missing part of their campaign, was the why part of it. Selfish versus community. The idea that everybody sort of has this. There's many people in the sort of pundits that sort of say, "Oh, you got to appeal to people's self-interest, appeal to their particular needs, particular thing in their life." In reality, most people vote for a community or a broader interest. When they go to vote, they want somebody that appeals to them in a broader way, in a bigger way. Not just somebody's going to save me $100 on my taxes, but how is that going to help the community? And how is that going to help our state, or how is that going to help the district, or how is that going to help the country? Most voters vote in a community broader interest, not in a selfish interest, which is why on Election Day, George Bush was able to get a huge chunk of voters that basically said they were worse off than they were 4 years ago individually, but felt the country was better off than it was 4 years ago. It's actually sort of turning what Reagan said on its ear a little bit. What Reagan said was almost true, which was, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? What really is, for that race, is the country better off than it was 4 years ago? Or is your state better off than it was 4 years ago? Or is your city better off than it was 4 years ago? Or is your city worse off if you're a challenger? And again, whether you're a challenger or an incumbent and all those things, each of those different, how you understand that will change the way you adjust your campaign. A challenger race in a city or an area that things are going well is much different than a challenger race in a place where it's going badly. So all of those sort of contexts, but fundamentally, when you're designing a campaign, it's got to be at its basis some community, some broader interest that's not just some particular self-interest. And that's sort of presidential. We don't need a... Hold on. Oops. Polarization, just real quickly, and this is obviously a huge problem. It's driven by a lot of things. It's driven by how we set up our districts in this country, the way people have lived in this country, what media they get, the confirmation bias, all the leadership that we've had in the last 10, 12 years at various levels, Congress and the presidential level. Obviously a huge problem. We all understand that. But from a campaign perspective, it's important to understand that as well. It goes to sort of the motivation persuasion discussion, which is how polarized is this state or is this district I'm in? Are we in such a place that I cannot appeal to anybody on the opposite side? What are we going to do if I know that I'm in a district that's so polarized that 42% of people, no matter what I say, are going to be against me? What do I do in the course of my campaign? Well, how does that polarization, which exists, though the American public, as you probably know, is growing very increasingly tired of it and wants more and more leaders that appeal to a broader, bigger interest, again, even if it's not in their particular interest. But polarization is an important factor to keep in mind when you're looking at it. Expectation setting, this is much more of a presidential, high-profile race situation. Wayne will probably touch on sort of this in the beginning. It's so important when you deal in the press from a campaign perspective to set expectations about what you think is going to happen in the course of your race. Obviously, you want to set expectations that you think you will exceed, or you want to set expectations for the other side in their campaign that you think they'll fall, because they will be covered in that way. That's important for whatever you're doing, the speech that you're going to give, set expectations for the speech, and so the coverage of it adjusts to it. Conventions, debates, all of those sorts of things, even as what polls, if you're expected some statewide polls about to come out, the Dallas Morning News is about to do a poll, and it's going to come out next week. Most political campaigns, if they're doing their job right, want to set expectation for people about what that means. They should have an idea, well, what that poll's, if they've been doing their research, is going to say, and they ought to be able to set the expectations, because the media is going to cover it, not only just the facts of the particular poll numbers, but how campaigns are adapting and what they're doing and when the understanding of it. So expectation setting is a huge part in the earned media or free media phase, but it's also very, very important when you're looking at your supporters. I mean, if all of a sudden you've been telling your supporters, oh, we're 10 points ahead and everything's great, no worries, and then the Dallas Morning News releases a poll that shows you 8 points behind, you got a problem with expectations among your own supporters. And your own supporters can not only be voters, but people that are going to give you money. So the next time you go to them and say, oh, give us money, they're going to say, wait a sec, you said we were 10 points up, it says we're 8 points down. So internally, expectation setting is very important. It's important just even with staff at level that say they understand what's going on and they know what's happening and what to expect in the course of a political campaign. And I think they read The Tipping Point. You already gonna? Okay. You all are going to read The Tipping Point. Some of you may have already read that book before you even got in the course. Great book. One thing, as you look at that book and as you read that book in the course of this campaign, think about the tipping point, though Malcolm Gladwell doesn't mention this in the book, why some of the lessons of tipping points is important to understand in the course of a political campaign. When you look at that, like accumulated evidence and all of that and what happens in the course of a campaign. So as you read that book, think about if you were doing a campaign and think about what, as the course of a race, why the sort of big, broad lessons in the tipping point would matter or make a difference in the course of a political campaign, not only in how that operates, coverage of it, all of those sorts of things. It's interesting. The press is always looking for, but they don't like necessarily call them this. The press in a political campaign is always looking for that tipping point, that particular thing that changed the nature of a campaign, that adjusted it one way for an advantage or disadvantage of somebody else, of your opponent or for you. There's always the press wants to sort of find a moment, find a time, find a thing when all of a sudden we didn't all sort of stay on our little happy train and all that, but it went off track or it went there. We were able to succeed at something or not. That's an important part when you read that book, besides a lot of other things in it, to sort of think about that, as I said, even though he doesn't mention it. And I think that's it. I don't know if Paul, I should have touched on something before, and I'm happy to sort of take any questions or any way you want to take it.